Hey, what's up, y'all? Lola Howard here, and welcome back to my channel. Today is a day to talk about something that I must admit to you that I hate. I'm a writer, and I hate revisions. Yes, I said it. I admitted it. I hate it. I hate it with a passion. And a lot of people ask, what's so hard about revision? Oh, in my opinion, revision is harder than drafting. I would rather write a book than revise one. I'm just going to admit that. But it's such a vital part of the process because nobody writes a great first draft. At least that's what I hear. When I talk about revision, a lot of my friends or people will ask me, what exactly does that mean? Can't you pay somebody to do that? A lot of times the words revision and editing are used interchangeably, but it's not really in the same process. It's part of the ending process. You have revisions, then you have editing, and then you have proofreading. And those are three very distinctive jobs, really. And the part that I'm working on right now is revision. I have a completed first draft, and as I go through my 90-day plan, a huge part of my 90-day plan is to finish revising and editing and proofreading my book. And at this point, I'm a little behind. I feel that I'm behind because I should be at least maybe 10 chapters in, and I think I've edited or revised maybe 3. So yeah, it's not going so well. So right now I feel a little overwhelmed. I feel behind. But I just thought I would come in and share with you my revision process. Now, when I say I had a completed first draft, don't get me wrong. I don't mean that I had the book completely 100% finished from beginning to end. What I mean is that I have what I consider to be pretty much a complete story. Not every part of the story has been figured out. I haven't worked out all the bugs. I haven't worked out all the details. I would say that the draft is about 80% complete. And I believe that in this book and my last book, when I got to around 75% complete of the first draft, that was when I started to consider myself done with the first draft and then went into the revision process. So the first thing that I do is I put all of my scenes/chapters in the correct order. I am a person that does not write chronologically. I know a lot of people live by writing chronologically and they start at the beginning and they go to the end. I don't write that way. I write the scenes that pop into my mind the most clearly first. The scenes that are the easiest to write, I write those first. And I leave the hard part until the end. That may not be the way that a lot of people do it, but that's the way that works for me. And it keeps me from getting stalled out in a particular area. If I have an idea for another part of the book, I just go ahead and write what's easiest for me. Because I do it this way, I write in a program called Scrivener where you can put each scene in a different section and you can move them around easily. They even have a view that's set up like index cards. I know the way that some people prefer to do it is to draft using index cards, where you write each scene down on an index card and then you put on that index card what each scene is about. I do that same process, but instead of using actual index cards, which I started out doing it that way when I first started writing, and I've transitioned to using Scrivener where I can type those notes out on a visual that looks like an index card and it looks like it's to a cork board. And once I get everything in order, the next thing I do is I print it out. I print it out front and back, double spaced, and I make sure that each chapter starts on a odd page. That way, each chapter is individual so that I can actually move the whole chapter around within my manuscript if I find once I print it out that something is still out of order. Now, I would say you don't have to print your manuscript out if you don't want to. If you have a problem with using that amount of paper, one solution, you may be able to do 2 pages per sheet if that's an option, although for me that's a little bit too small. Or if you're a person that can read through it electronically and make notes, do whatever works for you. But for me, it works better to print it out. And I print it out front and back. Here's my current copy of what I'm working on. Print it out. Yes, that's a lot of pages. And then at this point, get a big cup of coffee, an ink pen, preferably something that has contrast. I really like to use red or blue or something bright. Sit down, read through the book. From beginning to end, as if you were just reading it as a reader for the first time. And at this point during revision, what you're looking for is very high level things. Does the book flow? Do the characters make sense? Does the dialogue fit the character? And all you're going to do is make notes of things high level that seem to be off. Like, for instance, well, my main character says this and does this, but really that doesn't fit within her character. Let me make a note that I need to change her dialogue here. There's also things about point of view. One thing, I started writing my book in third person and decided that it would be better if it were in first person. And as I was doing this, I actually wavered back and forth a few times. So some chapters, I had about 5 chapters that are in third person and the rest of them that are in first person. One thing I had to do was make a note that said, change this chapter to first person. And I also went through, I have 4 characters and each character has a point of view. So I had to make sure that I took a note of which character was speaking and made sure that that stayed consistent in each chapter and not to switch back and forth between characters. Another thing is I had to consider my timeline. There are places where I had to say, okay, here I said it was hot outside. Okay, here I said there were leaves on the ground. Which one is it? How long is the timeline of this narrative? Those are high level things that you're looking for during revision. Those are the things that I look for. Those are the things that I focus on. Looking at the order, looking at the point of view, making sure that the characters fit what I want the characters to fit, making notes about character, making notes about setting, making notes about whether I thought the dialogue was realistic. I don't actually write it right then. I don't actually change anything. I'm just making notes saying these big things are really driving me nuts. I hate that. Sometimes I even put, oh, you use the word has a lot, which I do. I use certain words over and over and over again. I even put a note in there that says, go through and delete this word. You use this word a million times as you're reading through it. Those things will become obvious to you. Revision is about just slogging through. And what I find is, guess what? My first draft is crap. That's usually what it is. It's not bad. It's not good. There are some parts that really suck. There are some parts where I was like, girl, were you drunk when you wrote this? What is going on here? But that's all a part of the process. Don't get discouraged. Just go through the book, beginning to end, and then move on. Now, after I've gone through and I've made a list of all the high level things that I found that were incorrect. The other thing that I'm looking for at this point in the process as I read through is scenes that are irrelevant or scenes that do not move the story forward. A lot of times as I'm writing, I may have an idea that sounds like a really great idea and I really enjoy writing the scene, or it has some part of it like a setting. This book that I'm currently working on takes place in Atlanta. And so sometimes I can get caught up in writing in a setting that I really enjoy, or something happening or a conversation or something that was really fun to write. But when I read back through it, even though I like that scene and it sounds good and my language was banging that day and I really knew what I was talking about and I was writing, I was on top of the world, that scene just does not move the story forward. It does not do anything for the overall plot that I'm trying to achieve for this story. So unfortunately, I have to take it out. A term that may often be used by other authors is sometimes you have to kill your darlings. And that means that sometimes that chapter or that scene that you really enjoyed writing and that you feel like you wrote your best prose ever in life, it has to be cut. Cut it. Don't let it stay in there. If it's not moving your story forward, it's just killing the momentum of your story. But don't delete it. Don't make that mistake. Put it in another folder. Save it in a different place on your computer, because you never know, that scene may creep up and be relevant in another story, in another book at another time. Never delete your words. Just put them somewhere in a slush pile. I have a folder called slush pile where the scenes that I cut, I put them in there so that I may go back one day and I may not use a whole scene, but I may use a paragraph and say, oh, this paragraph was really great. Let me cut and paste that back in there. So don't delete it. Another thing that I do as I'm reading through my draft is identify any scenes that are missing. Because I write out of order, I may be reading through and I say, hey, right here, I need a transition scene that shows them going from the house to the bar. Or I need a scene that shows how did they get in from point A to point B, what situation happened there, or what conversation was had that led them to this area. And I make a note of that. And those are what I call identifying missing scenes. That's part of the first read through. Gonna look through and say, oh, I never addressed how this person and this person met, and I meant to talk about that. Or I have a love interest for my B plot and I did not address how they met. Now, that is an important thing too, because I tend to have subplots, but when I go through my first draft, sometimes I don't give those subplots enough detail. So that's another thing that I mark down in my revision. I say, oh, this is a great place to insert something about the subplot. This is a good place to insert a love scene that I didn't write. This is a good place to insert a sidebar conversation, a trip to the beach, or something that happened in my subplot. There's a good place to put it right here. And I'll make a note of it on that chapter. And a lot of my notes I put at the end of the chapter. So I may put it at the bottom of the page, or I may come on the back page of the last chapter and write all the notes that I have for that chapter back there. So that way I can find them easily. This time around during my revision process, I decided to use a spreadsheet method where I put all of my scenes into a spreadsheet and put a column that let me know whether this was the first draft, whether this was draft 2. And I also left a place for notes where I could put a list of all the high level revisions that I needed to make. So the next step for me this time was to go through and take all of my notes that I had written on the back of the page and insert those into my spreadsheet. Now, that's an unnecessary step, but for me, I felt that was a better way for me to become organized, because the last time I had things in a notebook and I had little notebooks and notes and pieces of paper with notes on all over the place, and it was very hard for me to stay organized. So I decided to use a spreadsheet. And at my day job, I am an engineer, so I kind of do nerdy things like put things in spreadsheets unnecessarily. So that was just something that I decided to do this time, but I'm actually finding that system to be pretty helpful for staying organized. Okay, now after all that, this is the part I hate with a passion. Is now it's time to start writing. So it's time to get another cup of coffee and maybe some Baileys or some whiskey and sit down at the computer and write those missing scenes. Now, for me, this is extremely hard to identify those missing scenes and then turn around and write them, because a lot of times that scene is missing because I didn't have a good idea, or it was hard, so I skipped it. And so now we're back to writing the hard stuff, the part that explains something, that it ties up loose ends, the part in between the action. Those are the parts that I find that are hardest to write. So I go through and I write each of the missing scenes if I can. When I get stuck on missing scenes, then it's time to start slogging through and going through it piece by piece. It involves going back to that revision list, taking the things that I have identified, and then going through and fixing them. And this is still high level. We aren't looking at grammar that much. We aren't looking at punctuation. Another thing that I do during this process is I kind of use the Pomodoro Method, which means that I set a timer for a certain amount of time, usually 25, 30 minutes, and I stick to it, head down, work on it. And then when that timer goes off, I take a break. And I may, walk and get a cup of water, get another cup of coffee or something, take a break, get my mind off it for a few minutes, and then come back to it. And usually when I'm doing revisions, I try to work on it in blocks of time. Now, lately, with my virtual writers group, we will meet and I may do an hour. But otherwise, get up on a Saturday and set aside maybe 4 or 5 hours. If I'm working on it once a week, I do try to set aside at least 4 hours to work on this process. I also like to play some type of ambiance music without words, like jazz or something like that, because words distract me. I start singing the songs, or if I'm listening to my favorite rap group, I may start rapping or something like that. So that's usually not good for doing revisions. But I may also put on heavy thunderstorms and rain sounds. I've recently been getting into sounds on YouTube that are like fire crackling in the fireplace along with rain, and I find that helps me with my concentration. But I will say, don't drink wine while you're trying to revise and then listening to the crackling fireplace with the rain. You will be asleep. You will be somewhere knocked out, curled in the corner under some cover. You will not be doing any revision. So don't fall into that trap. Now, going through those chapters, scene by scene, changing, making big changes, drawing X's through things, deleting things, not deleting them from your story, but don't delete them from your computer. Put them in another folder. But moving things around, I feel that to me takes the longest amount of time. When I get through that, at this point, I plan to be through that. It is January the 19th. So I'm hoping to be through with this part of what I'm doing by February the 19th. I'm giving myself a month to go through the rest of the book and revise everything. And at that point, when I get to the end of that, once I've identified my missing scenes, written those missing scenes, gone through each scene and chapter and made those high-level revisions, at that point, I consider that my second draft. And then at that point, it's time to go on to a third draft. And that is when it gets into the editing portion. So when I get to the editing portion, I guess we'll come back and do another video when I let y'all know about that. So wish me luck. I hope that I have given you some information to help you along with your revision process. I know this is hard. I know this is the part that a lot of people get hung up on. It's easy to stop. It's easy to give up when you have to go through and revise, and when you're reading, you're writing, it's not the best and you feel that you can do so much better. But don't give up. This is what's going to get us to this completed book. I hope that you will continue to follow me along this journey as I finish this second book. If you're interested, subscribe to my channel, give it a like, leave a comment. If you have any questions, please ask me in the comments and I'll be happy to answer. And hit that notification bell if you want to be notified when I upload a new video. We can do this. We can get through this. We're going to finish this book this year, y'all. You hear me? Let's do it. Thanks for watching my video, and I hope I'll see you next time. Bye.